It's official. Lead may have lowered your IQ and your occupational status and all kinds of things. That's according to new findings from the long-running Dunedin Study, and researchers are blaming high lead levels in the 70s and 80s. Now, the study found the higher the levels of lead found in the blood of 11-year-olds, the greater the loss of IQ and job status by the time they were 38. The impact of lead on children has been known for some time, but the Dunedin Study adds a longitudinal dimension, proving the impact lasts. Duke University clinical psychology PhD student Aaron Rubin is the paper's main author.
When we follow the same people over 30 years, 40 years, we start to see trends that allow us to say, look, there's an association between, in this case, childhood exposure to lead and having slightly lower IQ at midlife, slightly lower socioeconomic status. And what we know from other studies in animals, studies in cells, we know that lead has a direct neurotoxic effect. And in fact, on the developing child's brain, the effect of lead might be most toxic. So we sort of say, okay, we have this observational study which has come out today, finding long-term associations, and we know the way lead works in the brain, which is that it harms cognitive development, it harms neuronal growth and cellular signaling, and we think it's very likely that lead is driving the long-term declines in IQ that we reported today.
And if that is very likely, where was the lead? In other words, how were the children whose IQs you have been able to measure and follow through their lives most often exposed to lead?
Yeah. So this is a question we've been asking ourselves a lot, partly because we measured lead exposure as in how much did the children have in their bloods. And so we don't know, this child got it from this source and this child got it from another. That said, when our children were growing up, the lead in gasoline levels in New Zealand were some of the highest in the world. And so we think it's very likely that the exposures to lead that our cohort children experienced came from leaded petrol that was released into the environment, that settled in soils and dusts and was inhaled. And that we think is the primary exposure. However, we also know lead in paint and pipes is not an insignificant source, and in fact, some of the higher exposures in our cohort we know came from leaded paint. So it's not a clear-cut story by any means.
It is a fascinating story, isn't it? Because you have such a good sample and you are able to follow them so closely and so rigorously over such a long period of time. And the big question, I guess, if we are going to conclude some kind of cause and effect between leaded petrol and these outcomes, is why were the levels so high in New Zealand and why did lead stay in petrol for so long? Now, I know that's not for the longitudinal study to answer, but are you interested in these things?
I think all of us are interested in these things, and people nowadays have the benefit of hindsight to sort of look back and scratch their head and say, why did it take us so long to take lead out of gasoline? And I'll leave that answer to people who, based in New Zealand, have a real perspective on the historical trends and the governance issues that may have led people to maybe not view the new evidence that lead was harmful as quickly as they could have. What we do know is that taking lead out of gasoline has led to a huge drop in exposures and then lead in people's bodies. And what our study shows is that the probable long-term implications of lowering lead exposures society-wide will mean better intellectual abilities and better socioeconomic outcomes for the people of New Zealand, not to mention other countries like the U.S. and the U.K. where we phased lead out of gasoline.
That's Aaron Rubin, who is the lead author of the study. It really is a fascinating study. One of the interesting questions is if the factors are environmental, can you address a reduced IQ in such circumstances in the same way that you can work on your fitness? Can you return your mental acuity, the kind of cognitive skills, the intellectual skills that are measured in IQ? And the study authors don't yet know that, but they are fascinated by whether or not that is possible.